Okay, so this is going to be a little piece about how I broke into comics, although while I'm doing a little X-Men commission here with Wolverine, Cyclops and Jean Grey. A lot of people have been asking me this lately, so I'm going to talk you through it. Basically, I didn't know there was a job as a comic book artist when I was younger. I would see comic books and I would understand that people drew them for sure, but I definitely didn't think it was a kind of a thing that you could realize and actually do. And I didn't find that out properly, until, I guess I would have been in my early to late teens. So it was never really on my radar when I was younger, but I definitely liked drawing, loved drawing. I obviously read comics, whatever ones I could get. I was more likely to get my hands on like the annuals and things like that. Not necessarily those American format comics, which I really love and I've worked in for so long now because there wasn't a comic book store around me. But, anything visual I love. Like I really love designing video games. I love redrawing the characters from the Spider-Man cartoon. And if I got my hand on like a Spider-Man annual, I would redraw all of the pages and stuff like that from it. So it's something that I was always into, but I didn't realize that I could do that kind of a job until, like I was saying, I was in my late teens. When I did figure it out, I attacked it with everything that I had. I studied multimedia in college, and in multimedia there's a bit of filmmaking, there's website design, there's a small bit of illustration, but I really found out very fast that it was the illustration side of things that I really, really liked and really, really loved. So because of that, I realized that, comics was for me. So everything that I did, every college project that I had, I tried to turn it around and make it about comics, even if it wasn't necessarily to do it. So a good example would have been that, like, we had a business class, and in that business class I made the business proposals for a project about setting up a comic book company and things like that. So I just kind of threw myself into it, and I finished college. I put together a portfolio. This is what you need to do if you want to apply for a job in comics. A portfolio for comics is basically 5 pages of sequential comic book art. What sequential comic book art is, of course, is it's 5 pages that tell a story using comic book methods, like panels, things like that. So that's what I did. I sat down. I tried to draw comic book pages. I used to be on a forum called Digital Webbing. It was where I would get all my information from. I got my A3 paper I was using back then, not 10 on 11 by 17, and I would create my pages, photocopy them, put them together in a portfolio, and basically get them to a convention. And for me, going to a convention back then was traveling the world, basically taking out loans to fly to the biggest comic book shows in the world. And I googled what the biggest one was. San Diego Comic Con, of course, came up, and that's where I went. And my experience at the first San Diego Comic Con that I had was quite eye-opening, coming from literally no experience of a Comic Con to walking in the doors of San Diego Comic Con, which has over 100,000 people at it, was obviously mind-blowing. I thought I was better than I was illustration-wise back then, again, simply because I had no frame of reference. And I went into, what they would do back then was, DC were pretty cool in that they held panels specifically for breaking into comics, and they would talk you through what they needed in their portfolio, and it was like an hour-long show. Funnily enough, the people that were giving the show ended up becoming friends of mine afterwards. But back then, it was just one of the companies that I really wanted to work for up on stage, and me trying to listen to every single word they had. And I'll never forget the feeling of seeing the person's portfolio to the right of me and seeing the person's portfolio to the left of me, and realizing that they were basically better than me, and I had an awful lot left to learn. And very quickly I went from thinking that, I've come here to get my job at Marvel and DC, I'm ready, to realizing I had so much more to learn. And this is the key message from this. I've got so many messages within the last few weeks, especially since all this We Will Draw thing is kicked off, about, how do you get a job in comics? Can I do this at the age of like 15, 16, things like that. It doesn't really happen that simply anymore unless you're an absolute prodigy at art. You got to really work your way in, and you really got to develop a thick neck. You got to be used to failure, unfortunately, but that's the life of every single artist. I flew halfways around the world basically to get told that I wasn't good enough. my portfolio wasn't strong enough. And I could have done two things then. I could have, wallowed in self-pity and gone back home and figured, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, and not really learned from it. Or I could have went home, practiced, kept working and kept on improving. And obviously that's what I did. So rinse, repeat, cut to a year later, I went back to San Diego Comic Con with a new portfolio with a year's worth of work in there, again, to find out straight away that, still my stuff wasn't good enough, but it was improving. It was improving massively. So, and I was less interested then in meeting editors and trying to get a job, but I was more interested in meeting comic book artists there and showing them my portfolio and trying to learn from them. And I remember a specific example. I met the amazing J. Scott Campbell. Actually, he took my portfolio, he looked through it, he taught me through it, and he actually took out a piece of paper and redrew a Wolverine pose. Funnily enough, as I'm just finished drawing Wolverine here, showing me how to improve it and what to really work on, and just telling me things that I didn't even know. Like, he could just see that I didn't have a confidence in my line or anything like that, and this was just something that I didn't even understand then. But, I failed again in my job to get a comic book job at this convention that was halfway around the world again, but I learned so much more again. Flew back home, kept practicing, kept on going. And this was the process then for a little while. It was going to any convention that I could. It was bringing a new portfolio each time, 5 new pages that I poured my heart into, improved very much so with each set of pages, and brought them to a convention. And then instead of aiming for the top, what I was doing then is I was able to bring them to smaller publishers, and I started getting work there. I was picked up by an Irish company called Atomic Diner, subsidiary up in Dublin. Their comic book shop was publishing comics at the time, and have published quite a few Irish comic book artists. And through them, I got my first gig on Atomic Rocket Group. Each gig then was, a full drawn comic, which was 20 pages of essentially, practice, and would lead to the next one for me, thankfully. So I kept climbing the ladder. So that led to a job with Classical Comics, who were an English company where I basically had a year to redraw all of Shakespeare. I got quite friendly at that time with a bunch of other Irish comic book artists. We kind of called each other the Eclectic Mix, which is the likes of Declan Shalvey, Stephen Mooney, Nick Roach, PJ Holden, Stephen Thompson and Tom Moore, and we were all, challenging each other and pushing each other at the time. And that sense of community definitely helped me, being able to show my art to them and to get feedback and to help keep on improving. And it's no coincidence that we all started moving up together and started breaking into the industry, really at the same time. The first guy I met was Deck, and he got a job at Classical Comics. I followed him into Classical Comics. Then I got a job at Boom. He followed me into Boom. Then he got a job at Marvel, and I followed him into Marvel. We would push each other along the way all the time, which is really, really cool. And even though our styles are very, very different, we both still had that really hard work ethic, and we would stop at nothing to get these jobs. By breaking in then and by climbing that ladder, one of the key things that I did for me was that I would get on the radar of different editors at these conventions. The most important thing was when you showed them your portfolio, if you could get their card, get their email address, and Marvel would give you sample scripts, and they still do this, basically where they'll set you a challenge to draw 5 pages from a script. And that's what I was doing, and I was practicing doing these. I was sending them back and forth to Marvel the whole time, and I was kind of getting on their radar a bit. CB Cebulski, who's now the editor-in-chief, he was in that role, and he was awesome in that role, and I was constantly sending him in scripts, or sending him in illustrations of scripts, 5 pages. He would tell me what to improve on. I would go back, I would take a new sample script off him, and I would work again. And it was CB then that ultimately gave me the job at Big Bang Comics show Dice up in Dublin. And it was amazing. I've been sending him in scripts for many, many years, and it's just really, really nice to know that, he was able to track my improvement, to see it consistently grow from submission to getting close, to getting closer. He wasn't necessarily telling me this, that I was getting closer, but he was consistently encouraging me to draw more, until basically he gave me the go-ahead and gave me the job, and I've been with Marvel ever since, and I've done almost 100 comics for them in the last 7 or 8 years. So that was my journey, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to you there. So thank you.